One fact about every US president from George Washington to the present day. Supposedly one of the reasons George Washington accepted the job of president was because the pay was good and he needed the money after the Revolutionary War. This allowed him to keep up with essential household purchases such as a leopard skin robe for his horse. John Adams' opponents accused him of wanting to be a king, so began calling him his rotundity as a play on grand royal titles. Thomas Jefferson smuggled rice seeds out of Italy because they were supposedly more desirable than their US counterparts. At the time, smuggling was punishable by death, which is a heavy price to pay for some good risotto. James Madison was the shortest ever US president, measuring just 5 foot and 4 inches. James Monroe died on the 4th of July. Incredibly, he was the third president to do so after Jefferson and Adams, which is kind of impressive considering that there's only been 5 of them at this point. John Quincy Adams nearly shot himself in the face when trying to show his sons how to handle firearms. He accidentally tried to load an already loaded gun, prompting it to go off in his face. Andrew Jackson was a maniac who loved to duel, supposedly taking part in over 100 during his lifetime. Martin Van Buren was a man for detail, apart from in his own autobiography, where he doesn't mention his wife, Hannah, even once. William Henry Harrison had the shortest presidential term in US history, lasting just 31 days before dying of pneumonia. This was potentially caused by the cold weather during his inauguration speech, which was, ironically, the longest ever given by a president. John Tyler was never elected president, only coming to power due to the death of Harrison. As such, he was very defensive of his status, sending back any letters addressed to the acting president as opposed to just the president. James Knox Polk was a famous workaholic to the point where he died just 3 months after losing office. Seems like he didn't know what to do with himself without his job. Zachary Taylor didn't last long, as he was done in by either some off cherries or cholera-infected water. Either way, he only lasted around 1 year in office. Millard Fillmore was reportedly the most handsome man Queen Victoria had ever seen. Yeah, sorry Albert. Franklin Pierce was such a bad president that the slogan of his own party for their convention in 1856 was, "Anybody but Pierce." James Buchanan is the only president to have never married, though he did have a close relationship with William Rufus King, with the two earning the nicknames Mr. Buchanan and his wife. Abraham Lincoln gained the respect of a local gang by wrestling with their leader. Following this, the gang would supposedly sometimes come to Lincoln's debates to show support. Andrew Johnson compared himself to Jesus while on the campaign trail, arguing that God had struck down Abraham Lincoln so that he could be president. Ulysses S. Grant, despite being a war leader with a reputation for high casualty rates, was reportedly squeamish about blood and would often feel faint at the sight of it. Rutherford B. Hayes had to be sworn in secret over fears of potential assassination. This was because Hayes had lost the popular vote by around 250,000. James A. Garfield was only president for 4 months before being assassinated because he didn't give a guy the job he wanted. Chester A. Arthur lived for fashion, supposedly owning around 80 pairs of trousers. When Grover Cleveland was drafted to fight in the American Civil War, he simply paid someone else $150 to go and fight for him, which was apparently something you could do back then. Benjamin Harrison wasn't particularly interesting, but was the last president to have a beard. Till we meet again, old friend. Oh, it's Grover Cleveland again, making him the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. William McKinley claimed that he didn't want to see the US in another conflict following his time in the Civil War. Despite this, he oversaw a dramatic increase in American militarism, including the Spanish-American War. While Theodore Roosevelt was campaigning for a third presidential term, he was shot by a saloon keeper. Roosevelt would then go on to give a full 1-hour speech before eventually allowing his aides to take him to hospital. William Taft was a large fella, getting stuck in the White House bathtub so many times that he eventually ordered for a new, much larger one to be installed. Despite Woodrow Wilson's austere reputation, many of his letters to his wife were pretty lusty, promising to assail her with innumerable kisses and a storm of lovemaking. Warren G. Harding didn't think he was good enough to be president, but his wife, Florence, was set on the idea and played a large part in making it happen. Calvin Coolidge tried to get through his presidency saying as little as possible, often just giving no as an answer in press conferences. Herbert Hoover didn't like seeing the White House as servants, and so an elaborate bell system was created to warn them when the president was near. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a 7th cousin once removed from Winston Churchill. More than that, he was also distantly related to a number of other presidents, including George Washington, John Adams, Theodore Roosevelt, of course, and many more. Harry S. Truman is the only 20th century president to have never received a college degree. Dwight Eisenhower's parents were part of a fundamentalist religious group that strongly believed in pacifism, and somehow Eisenhower would go on to become one of the most important generals in World War II. John F. Kennedy was an infamous womanizer, having affairs with a number of women such as Marilyn Monroe and even an East German spy. Lyndon B. Johnson would often continue having meetings with staffers in the toilets while he went to the loo. Richard Nixon became the only president to ever resign following the Watergate scandal. Gerald Ford is the only president to have worked as a model, appearing in articles detailing how beautiful people lived in the 30s. To be fair though, this was him in his younger days. Jimmy Carter is the only president to have claimed to have seen a UFO. At the time, Ronald Reagan was the US's oldest ever president and had a habit of dozing off during meetings. George H.W. Bush once threw up on the lap of the then Japanese Prime Minister during a state dinner. Bill Clinton was seemingly a bit of a sex addict, allegedly allegedly having a huge number of affairs, including 2 which both lasted over 10 years each. George W. Bush once choked so hard on a pretzel that he became unconscious. Truly, presidential assassins come in all shapes and sizes. Barack Obama was the 3rd president in a row to be left-handed, which is kinda surprising considering there's only been 7 left-handed presidents in total. Donald Trump is the first former president to have been criminally charged, facing around 91 charges across 4 cases. The year Joe Biden first became a senator, his family was involved in a severe car accident, meaning Biden had to be sworn in while in his family's hospital room. And that's the end. Also, shout out to Secret Lives of the Presidents for a lot of these facts.